Well, thank you very much, Bob. It's a great pleasure to be here. I want to thank you and May for inviting me to be part of this panel. Very august panel, indeed. And it's a great pleasure to be, with Vince Fong. I've known Vince for many years as well, from, before he was elected. So, it's a great pleasure to see you again, Vince. I don't get down to Bakersfield enough to see you. So.
You probably get down too much, right?
Right. But, and also, Jessica, I admire the job you're doing. You were on the show of a good friend of mine, Phil Cowan, a few weeks ago, and I heard you on there discussing all your activities and all of the successes you've accomplished as chair of the party. So, my kudos to you for all you've done. Bob, I've known for many years. We've participated in many school choice events, education events together. So, it's great to, that the whole team is back together again. So thanks again. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today to speak on the danger to our equal rights posed by Proposition 16, which would repeal Proposition 209, which was passed back in 1996, which bans preferences and discrimination based on race. So in the brief time that I have to speak here today, I want to touch on four important points. First is the moral case against Proposition 16. Second is the impact of discrimination against Asian Americans that occurred in California prior to the passage of Prop 209. And third, how universities that are not bound by laws like Prop 209 discriminate against Asian Americans. And fourth, how the current attempt to repeal Prop 209 ignores the real causes for the difficulty underrepresented minorities face in accessing a quality education that will give them the ability to enter into a top public university. So first, it's important, I think, for all of us to understand, and Jessica alluded to this in her remarks, that Prop 209 is based on the exact language of the U.S. Civil Rights Act of 1964. And Prop 209 is the current law, which Jessica mentioned, but I think it bears repeating what it actually says. So Prop 209, which is the current law, says that the state shall not discriminate against or grant preferential treatment to any individual or group on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in the operation of public employment, public education, or public contracting. And so I think it's important to underscore this similarity between our Prop 209 current law here in California and the U.S. Civil Rights Act, because President Kennedy and others, when the Civil Rights Act was passed back in 1964, made a real moral case for its passage. And that moral case for the passage of the U.S. Civil Rights Act applies to the Prop 209 here in California. President Kennedy said, "We are confronted primarily with a moral issue, and the heart of the question is whether Americans are going to be afforded equal rights and equal opportunities, whether we are going to treat our fellow Americans as we want to be treated." And he further said that all Americans have the right to expect that the law will be fair and that the Constitution will be colorblind. And so the United States Congress passed the U.S. Civil Rights Act in response to this moral case laid out by President Kennedy. And again, Californians responded to this moral case for non-discrimination and passed Proposition 209 in a near landslide victory back in 1996. And I think right now, from where we stand in 2020, we forget about what things were like here in California prior to the passage of Prop 209. What was it like in California prior to 1996? Well, what you saw was there was blatant discrimination going on by California government against people of different races, but especially against Asian Americans. So, for example, prior to Prop 209, the University of California practiced widespread racial discrimination in its admissions process. My institute, the Pacific Research Institute, did a study back in 1995, and we found that prior to the UC's forced elimination of race preferences, Japanese Americans, and I'm Japanese American, Japanese Americans were 13 times less likely to be accepted to UC Davis Medical School than members of groups benefiting from race preferences. Korean Americans were 14 times less likely to be accepted than those who benefited from race preferences. Our PRI study looked at UC Medical School applicants who had received their undergraduate degrees from UC Irvine. And among these UC Irvine graduates, applicants from underrepresented minority groups were 3 times more likely to be accepted to a UC medical school than Vietnamese American applicants, even though the Vietnamese American applicants had a group GPA of 3.8, which was the highest of any racial group. And so if Prop 16 is passed and Prop 209 is repealed, expect race preferences to be adopted once again by the University of California, which will end up discriminating against Asian Americans. And if you don't believe me, look at what's going on at Harvard and Yale right now. These are schools that are not bound by a law like Prop 209, which we here in California have benefited from since 1996. At Harvard, even though Asian Americans consistently have the highest academic index, which is a combination of the SAT scores and high school grades, they also have the lowest admission rate at Harvard of any racial group. For decades, the admissions rate for Asian Americans never got above 20%. There was a ceiling. There is a ceiling on Asian Americans who are applying to Harvard. For an Asian American male, if you look at an Asian American male applying to Harvard, that Asian American male has only 1/4 the chance of getting into Harvard as an African American with the same characteristics, only 25% of the chance. So the bottom line is that Harvard gives admissions preferences based on race, which discriminate against Asian Americans. And in fact, Harvard's own research shows that the proportion of Asian Americans at Harvard would actually double if the applicants were admitted on academic excellence alone. And the same discrimination against Asian Americans goes on at Yale. Yale's own data shows that Asian Americans have a much lower chance of being admitted compared to applicants from racial groups that are given preferences. According to the US Department of Justice, which is looking into the admissions process at Yale, Asian Americans have only 1/10 to 1/4 the likelihood of admissions to Yale as African American applicants with comparable academic credentials. So if Proposition 16 is passed, expect California to imitate the racial discrimination against Asian Americans that we see at Harvard and Yale. So let me also end by picking up on a point that Vince Fong mentioned in his remarks about, the fact that, instead of looking at something like Prop 209, current California law against discrimination, let's look at what's going on in the K-12 level, which is causing these so many kids of all races not to be prepared for a high-performing institution like the University of California. If you look at the University of California, the UC's own academic senate said that they put out a report early this year that found that for underrepresented minorities, the most significant factor preventing their eligibility for the University of California was not Prop 209, was not the current anti-discrimination law, but the failure, and this is a quote, the failure to complete all required A through G college preparatory courses with a C or better, unquote. So even UC President Janet Napolitano, who supports Prop 16, who supports the repeal of anti-discrimination laws against everybody here in California, she admits that the biggest contributor to the underrepresentation of students at UC is that those students do not fulfill the A through G subject matter requirements for admissions. So if legislators, policymakers, and educators truly want to improve the chances for success for underrepresented minority children, then they would avoid the divisive identity politics that they're practicing now in trying to get rid of Prop 209 through Proposition 16, and they would get to the hard work of offering better education alternatives for all children in California. And so let me end by quoting President Kennedy's message on the U.S. Civil Rights Act one more time. The president said that America was founded on the principle that all men are created equal and that the rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened. Passing Prop 16 and repealing Prop 209 would therefore threaten the equal rights of Asian Americans and thus by extension all people in California. And that would be wrong. And with that, I thank you very much and, look forward to any questions.
Lance, you make some really, there's so much content in there, it's hard to know where to jump in. But let me take a stab at it. It's sort of an editorial comment in itself. But raising money to fight this has been a challenge. We have Prop 15, we got a lot of important things on the ballot, and there's just no real champion to help fight this. That's one reason why we're doing these media calls, and there's a lot of grassroots efforts. But on the for side, they've raised about $20 million. And one of the largest donors is the California Teachers Association. Might you like to speculate about why that would be the case?
Well, that's exactly, the California Teachers Association is for anything that lessens their responsibility, right? It's like, let's distract from our own culpability in not producing kids who are prepared for college and instead distract people's attention, focus their attention on something that is basically trying to close the barn door after the horse is left.
Right.
And so, if the barn is K-12 education and the horse is the student, well, they're closing the barn door after that horse has now left the barn unprepared for college. And so I think that when you look at the California Teachers Association, the fact that like you and I, Bob, and Vince, and others, we've been fighting for school choice for many years, right? Because we want to give all children the opportunity for a quality education so that they get the preparation they need. There are great charter schools, there are great private schools, there are great other education alternatives that would prepare these kids for that UC education, and they would not need a Prop 16 to get into and raise preferences to get into those schools. And like Jessica said, you want to have kids getting into a top university like UC Berkeley or wherever based on the fact that they feel that they merited getting in there. Not because, as Jessica mentioned, the color of their skin, their age, their sex, their whatever, because they spent the hard work, they received the education necessary to produce that foundation of knowledge that would earn them the right to be at a university like UC Berkeley or UCLA, where I went to school. And so I think that we need to look at the root cause